This morning on Easter morning, I want to talk about, well, disruption. I thought as we celebrate a second Easter where we've, well, been disrupted, I want to talk about those life changing disruptions in our lives. None of us like change. None of us like situations where our lives are turned upside down. But we've all experienced profound and unexpected changes in our lives. And in many ways, as someone who strangely likes to read leadership and business books, uh, I've read a lot about disruptive change. And it happens in small ways and in large ways. It could happen. Don't get in a car, you don't take a journey that you expect. Or we have a small microscopic bug that, infects the world and turns our world upside down. And we experience change in ways we never expected, but also we experience epiphanies. I love the idea of an epiphany. It's not just a date on the church calendar, but rather what happens to us when it clicks, when we get it. And on that first Easter morning, a small handful of people experience that profound epiphany, that disruption, that shakeup, that challenge, that evolution, if you want to say, that change that transformed them. Mary never anticipated that her friend and teacher Jesus wouldn't be in the tomb. She wasn't expecting a resurrection. She didn't understand his teachings because she didn't have the context for it. She didn't live with a worldview that anticipated a resurrection. It was completely beyond anything that she understood. So when she ran into Jesus in the garden after seeing the empty tomb, she still didn't get it. Until he spoke the words, she thought he was the gardener. But something profound happened to her and the disciples when they encountered Jesus. They knew joy. And I love this picture I saw several years ago. They knew a profound joy. Can't you just see the joy and the happiness in this child's face? I'm not sure what's going on. I'm not sure what situation has happened in this child's life. Well, what I do know is that for me, it captures the moment I think that Mary felt when she saw and realized it's Jesus. He's risen. He's actually alive. This teacher, this friend, this rabbi. And she was filled with joy and happiness. And that's what happens when people encounter the risen God, this risen Lord, the Jesus, the Christ. In fact, one of my favorite authors entitled the book, his transformation from atheism to being a Christian as surprised by joy. C.S. Lewis talked about his transformation and the joy he knew after that life changing encounter that made everything that happened before it pale and flat compared to the life that he now knew in Christ. In the same way, this is what happened to Mary and the disciples. And that happens to so many people. In fact, almost all the people I talk to who know Christ will describe their lives before this personal, deep relationship with Jesus. And even more, if they're intimate in the relationships that are formed and forged between brothers and sisters in Christ in the community, they know a joy that those without that same faith never do. But more than joy, that disruptive encounter, that epiphany gives us not just joy and happiness, but gives us a courage to do profoundly crazy and wonderful things. I've got to tell you, one of my favorite things in the world is doing what this gentleman is doing right now. It's called a halo jump. You jump out an airplane at incredible heights and you get to fly for a while. And it takes a little bit of courage and a lot of stupidity to do this, but it is incredible. But even scarier for me is the kind of courage that the disciples and Mary and so many others displayed after the encounter with Jesus. If we remember the story, when Jesus was taken, as we talked about just a couple of days ago, the disciples fled. They scattered. They were hiding in all these different places in the upper room together, afraid of the authorities. Were they going to be next? Were they going to be crucified? Were they going to be prosecuted by the Sanhedrin? What was going to happen to them? But suddenly, the encounter with Jesus transformed these shy, meek, fearful men and women into the courageous people that would transform the world, into people who would boldly preach the gospel in the square of the temple, who would die as martyrs. For me, it's the same kind of quiet courage that many of them showed that I saw through the pandemic and my friends who worked in the hospital, who worked to the point of exhaustion. And if you ask them why, it's for the love to save so many who needed it and couldn't save themselves. In the same way, the disciples knew and felt that they needed to share this gospel, this good news of the resurrection, of a possibility of freedom from the fear of death to the world around them. Because only they could be the messengers. Only they were called to go and make disciples of all the nations. Only they can provide this beautiful gift of salvation, which is what we're called to do. We're called to proclaim this great news at great risk to ourselves, the risk of death, or even the risk of mockery. But Jesus said to all of us that he is the resurrection and life, and the one who believes in me will live even though they die. And this is a message that we all need today. And we get to live in that for all eternity, not just with him, but with all our brothers and sisters. It's a new vision for the future. I think that's what activates people. It's not just, material things, but rather a vision of this empty cross. We meet that risen Christ on this day, especially to celebrate Easter. We're filled with a new vision, a vision of the possibilities of what it means to be a child of God, what it means to live a life free of fear, what it means to live a life that's never alone, what it means that we are part of something greater that makes an impact in the world, that makes and transforms lives, not just our own, but those around us and those that we care for. And we also get the capacity to care for those that are hardest to care for. As a people, when we meet Jesus and we're filled with this vision, the same vision that propelled him to the cross, we know his presence in our lives. We meet that risen Lord and we are forever transformed. We get to live in the aftermath of the empty tomb. We get to live in that revolution, that uprising that saves and not slays. He is risen, as he said to us today. Today, we live in a time and a place where a third of the world celebrates that resurrection. And the thing that we have to remember is we are the brothers and sisters of all of those. But also, we stand on the shoulders of billions who came before. You know, this has been a terrible year, but because we have Christ, because of Easter morning, we know a joy and a profound satisfaction, a profound hope for the world that even though the world tries to tear it from us, they can never tear us apart. For Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. The tomb is empty, and we are his people, brothers and sisters in faith. Like my friends, my family, know you have that joy available to you. He can fill you with the courage and especially that vision of what he's calling us to do to make a God sized impact on Los Angeles, on California, on the world around us by the quality of our lives and the way we express that joy to those in our community and beyond. Go today, this Easter day, knowing that joy and that peace. Go today in the love of Christ.